With the exception of pointless sequels and remakes, there is nothing that Hollywood loves more than guns. Whether a movie is set in the Old West or the distant future, whether it's action or comedy, there is always a good chance that guns will play some role in the plot. But Hollywood gets a lot of things wrong about guns. Sometimes it's just to make the action easier for the audience to follow or to keep the pace of the movie flowing, but more often than not, it's a bunch of over-the-top and completely impossible nonsense done just because the director thinks that it'll look really cool.
Dodge this.
Today we're going to look at several of these gun myths that have become Hollywood tropes, and of course, don't try this at home. You've likely seen it 100 times in movies. Someone takes a shot at a barrel of oil or gasoline, a car's gas tank, or even a propane tank. The result is a massive explosion, often triggering other explosions in the process. People love seeing things blow up in movies, so it's no surprise that this trope would remain popular. But are exploding barrels a real possibility? Well, no, not even a little bit.
What happened? I don't know, it just didn't explode. That's weird.
It would require the perfect proportion of air to vapor. A barrel full of liquid gasoline is unlikely to have much air or vapor, let alone enough of them in the exact amounts required to facilitate an explosion. You would require either a gas tank or barrel that was mostly empty of liquid fuel, but that had also been heated to a point where the liquid fuel was turning into vapor. In this specific scenario, it becomes somewhat more plausible, but it's still extremely unlikely because of the precise mixture of air that is needed as well. Even if the mixture inside the barrel was correct, firing an ordinary bullet at it still wouldn't result in an explosion because the reaction requires an ignition source. A standard bullet won't produce enough heat or sparks to cause the gas to ignite. Instead, it's just gonna leak. It's really boring, we know. If there, for some reason, was an open flame near the puncture, it's possible that the vapor could ignite, but even then, it's more likely to just burn rather than explode. The odds of an explosion could be increased by using tracers or incendiary rounds, but even then, it's not guaranteed to work, and it remains unlikely. People love explosions, so it's unlikely that Hollywood is going to stop embracing this myth anytime soon, but the very notion that shooting a barrel could cause it to explode is likely the result of another Hollywood myth. Whenever a gun is fired in a movie and doesn't hit its target, sparks typically fly everywhere. From the perspective of a visual narrative, this serves to show where the bullet actually hit and just how close it came to striking the hero. Alternatively, firefights in movies may take place in rooms filled with needless amounts of glass, as the shattering glass can produce a similar effect to aid the viewer's perception. However, in the real world, bullets will very rarely cause a spark. The sparks that you see when two pieces of metal are struck against one another, or when metal is struck against a rock, are tiny fragments of metal that have broken off and ignited. In order for this to happen, there needs to be a sufficient amount of friction and heat generated by the impact. Most importantly, this works best with harder materials like iron. Bullets, on the other hand, are typically made with lead and copper. As a general rule, these materials don't spark because they are so soft. While harder materials can generate large amounts of friction on impact, these softer metals simply deform instead. Though it makes sense to have bullets spark in movies so that the viewer can see where the bullet hit, this is nothing like the real world. And as it relates to the previous myth, since ordinary bullets don't actually spark even when they strike other metals, a bullet fired at a barrel would not generate the means to ignite the gas. When you think about sniper scenes in movies, it's usually some lone assassin on a rooftop. They get into position, assemble their rifle, then quickly take their shot before packing up their gear and making their escape. It certainly looks cool in movies, but it's not an accurate portrayal of snipers at all. To begin with, the rifle would already be assembled when the sniper got into position. These guns need to be sighted, and doing so requires taking test shots to ensure that they are properly zeroed in. Without taking these extra steps, what looks like a perfect shot might actually miss the target entirely. It's also extremely rare for snipers to work alone. They generally work in two-person teams consisting of a sniper and a spotter, with the spotter being the more experienced team lead. Sniping involves both a lot of reconnaissance and a lot of maths, both of which are predominantly left to the spotter. They will identify the targets and calculate the distance to their target. They also need to monitor weather conditions, taking into account wind speed and direction, as well as temperature, humidity, and altitude. All of these can affect the trajectory of a bullet, and all need to be accounted for. In the incredibly rare instance where a sniper had to work alone, they would need to do all of these calculations themselves. That's not to say they wouldn't be capable of doing so. Movies generally just don't bother showing how much maths is involved in the job. In addition to aiding the sniper in lining up the perfect shot, spotters also need to ensure that their location remains undetected, monitoring for any activity that might suggest that they've been compromised. In the event that enemy combatants locate the sniper, a spotter will be equipped with an M16 or other automatic weapon to fight off attackers. After all, a sniper rifle may be great for taking out a single high-priority target at a long range, but it's terrible for fighting against multiple targets at close range. Of course, the reality of a sniper's job doesn't necessarily make for great cinema. Missions frequently involve multiple days of observation and waiting, and it requires a lot of patience. A lone badass assembling their rifle and taking out a target mere seconds later looks much cooler to a typical audience, but it is a far cry from the reality of the job. When people are shot in movies, they tend to fall backwards, which does make intuitive sense. If you're struck from the front, your body should travel in the same direction as the force that was imparted onto you. However, in movies, this effect is exaggerated to the extreme.
Bye, Miss Laura.
Gunshot victims in movies don't just fall backwards, they fly backwards through the air. The bullets will knock a person clean off their feet, causing their body to crash against a wall behind them or even fly through a pane of glass. And again, this does make some amount of intuitive sense. Bullets move extremely fast, and so they should transfer some amount of momentum to anything that they strike. Now, while that is absolutely true, bullets are also really small. A bullet weighs only a few grams, while the average person in North America weighs 80 kilograms. This means that the force imparted will be largely negligible with respect to the person's weight. According to a 1996 paper published in the National Journal of Medicine, a bullet striking a person will result in a maximum backwards motion of 0.18 meters per second. To get numbers that high required using shotguns and large caliber rifles, whereas a handgun would only cause a person a backwards motion of about 0.01 meters a second. As a basis of comparison, a typical walking speed is 1 to 2 meters per second, so this backwards motion from being shot ranges from almost entirely negligible to completely negligible. The body will also reflexively counteract this motion as well. Realistically, the most that will happen after being hit by a high-powered firearm is that a person may need to take a single step backward to catch their balance. It's also worth noting the bullets aren't designed to impart force onto a target. They're meant to pierce the skin and cause maximum damage to a person's insides. In order to knock someone over, it would require a much larger, heavier, and flatter projectile. This would also be much less deadly. But what if it actually could work? What if someone designed a gun that really was powerful enough to knock a target clean off their feet and send them flying backwards through the air? Well, theoretically, there's nothing that makes designing a gun for this purpose impossible, but good luck to whoever actually fires this one, thanks to Newton's third law of motion. Newton's law states that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. If object A imparts a force onto object B, then object B will impose an equal force on object A in the opposite direction. It's why your hand hurts after you punch someone and why guns have recoil. But that recoil is nothing compared to what a theoretical gun would create. In order for a gun to fire a bullet that could send a person flying through the air, the person who fired the gun would have to be sent flying through the air in the opposite direction. Though an effect like this has almost certainly appeared in comedies before, action movies and dramas are unlikely to ever employ this more realistic physics. Automatic guns are a staple of action movies. There's something so satisfying for audiences about seeing their favorite action hero pull the trigger and unleash a seemingly endless barrage of bullets on their enemies. It's common to see people in movies spray bullets in fully automatic mode for a solid 30 seconds or longer before reloading, assuming the movie even bothers to show them reloading at all. It looks cool, and it allows the director to include lots of sparks, shattering glass, or even trees being fully cut down by gunfire, but this is absolutely ludicrously impossible. A standard magazine holds 20 to 30 rounds, and fully automatic weapons fire anywhere from 600 to 950 rounds per minute, depending on the model. Even taking the low end of that, which is the firing rate of an AK-47, that's still 10 rounds per second. After just 3 seconds of fully automatic fire, the magazine would be empty and need to be reloaded. The standard combat load for US infantry is only 210 rounds. The average soldier takes 2 to 4 seconds to change a magazine, so firing all of that ammo on fully automatic mode would take less than a minute. Given how much automatic gunfire is seen in action movies, this highlights just how ridiculous the amount of rounds action heroes shoot is. Rambo could fire more rounds than a soldier's entire combat load without ever reloading, and the movie might even just treat those as warning shots. Because of how fast magazines can be emptied, and because the recoil makes firing in this way extremely inefficient, some military weapons don't even have fully automatic options anymore. Instead, they may only allow for single shot or 3-round bursts. When it comes to movies involving spies and assassins, there is no greater tool than the silencer. Not only do these devices turn the loud bang of a firearm into a barely audible pew or poof, but they seem to magically silence the target as well. Characters in movies who are shot with silenced pistols almost universally die instantly and silently rather than screaming in pain like those shot from unsuppressed guns. But is there any truth to this at all? Well, kinda, yeah. Silencers, or suppressors as they are more accurately called, do dramatically lower the volume of a firearm. Guns produce sounds that are up to 175 decibels. By way of comparison, a jet engine only produces 140. A suppressed gun, however, lowers the volume to between 110 and 120 decibels on average. While noteworthy, on the surface, 50 to 60 decibels doesn't sound like a huge reduction. The suppressed gun only produces about 35% fewer decibels of sound. However, it's important to remember that decibels are a logarithmic scale, and every 10 decibels is an apparent doubling of volume. This means that an unsuppressed gun is 32 to 64 times louder than one with a suppressor. That is a huge reduction in volume, but when the starting point was louder than a jet engine, it is still pretty loud. For reference, 110 decibels of suppressed firearm is the same volume as a chainsaw. But despite originally being marketed with the name, silencers weren't actually designed to be silent. The first commercially successful silencer was produced by Hiram Percy Maxim in around 1902. He invented the device because his father, Hiram Stevens Maxim, inventor of the world's first fully automatic machine gun, went deaf as a result of all the testing that he had to do with his guns. Maxim, by the way, used the same technology as his silencer to invent the car muffler as well. Though suppressors do dramatically reduce the volume and incidentally also reduce recoil, they were designed as a way to reduce permanent hearing loss. That's not to say they aren't without military applications, of course. The reduced sound can make it harder for enemies to locate their attacker. Suppressors also reduce or eliminate muzzle flash, making it even more difficult to locate a shooter's position while also protecting the shooter's night vision. But for all their potential benefits, suppressors remain anything but silent. The shot will still produce a loud crack, the mechanical action of the gun makes plenty of noise, often exceeding 100 decibels on its own, and the bullets will still create a sonic boom when they break the sound barrier. If you would suddenly find yourself under fire, a good idea is to take cover. For Hollywood, taking cover seems to mean hiding behind literally anything at all. Whether it's an old refrigerator, a couch, or a wooden table, people in movies are always dodging behind objects to shield themselves from the oncoming bullets. Of course, none of these things we mentioned actually provide any meaningful cover. While a mattress or thick wooden table might provide some level of protection against birdshot, a typical handgun will have no problem piercing any of these objects. Of the things we listed, a refrigerator is the most likely to save your life, but only if it's full and you're lucky enough for the bullet to pass through a lot of stuff on its way to the other side. An empty refrigerator won't offer any protection. But of all the things people take cover behind in movies, none is more ubiquitous or more egregious than hiding behind a car, particularly a car door. It happens all the time in Hollywood shootouts too. A police officer will fling their door open and use it as a shield while occasionally standing up to return fire over the door. In reality, a car door would offer no protection. This has been tested countless times, and the results consistently show that while a small caliber handgun bullet might be slightly deflected, bullets generally have no issue passing through a car's body or windows. The only part of a car that would provide serious cover is the engine block, though ensuring that your body is effectively hidden behind the engine would be more than a little difficult, especially in the heat of the moment. The idea that hiding behind a regular couch would save you from oncoming bullets may be ridiculous, but audiences are unlikely to complain about this trope too much. If the characters were immediately killed instead of somehow being shielded by a sofa, they would never get the chance to exchange pithy lines of dialogue with their attackers, and well, really, that's what action movies are all about, aren't they?